Welcome to Season 3 of the Knack for Business podcast. Over 200 episodes strong, we're here to ignite your entrepreneurial spirit with fresh insights, networking gems, and creative strategies that elevate your game. Are you ready to discover what your Knack for Business truly is?
Today's topic is generosity is good business. Your hosts are Bernie Fransford from Creative Insight and Wayne Pratt from Motivate You Inc. So what can you expect from the Knack for Business podcast? We aims to help you find your feet in the business world. Whether you're just starting out or you've been at it for a while, we have something for everyone. In each episode, we dive deep into a particular area of business and explore the ins and outs of that subject. They interview guests that are experts in their field who share their success stories and their experiences. They offer practical tips and advice. Good. Our guest today is Bob DePasquale from Bob DePasquale, the Generosity Guy. He's a firm believer that generosity makes life better for everyone, whether you're giving, receiving, or just witnessing it. At a young age, Bob experienced firsthand how acts of generosity can change lives, including his own. After facing a cancer diagnosis and surviving the tragic events of 9/11 in New York City, he went from feeling invincible to vulnerable. But what followed was a journey of profound generosity that helped him rebuild his life. For over 23 years across 3 different countries and 17 U.S. states, Bob has dedicated himself to empowering mission driven organizations to cultivate generous cultures where employees thrive and customers are fulfilled. His story is unique, but his message is universal, reminding us all that generosity can not only transform our work, but can also make a lasting impact on the world. Bob, welcome. And what is your favorite quote or saying, sir?
My favorite quote or saying is, "You may not change the world, but you may change the world for one." Heard that when I was at a concert as a teenager.
Oh, excellent. What was the concert?
A band is no longer exist, or they haven't toured in years, but it was called Rough Draft.
Oh, really?
Hmm.
I'll have to look them up. So
Awesome.
tell us about the personal journey and how generosity became that central theme. What kind of drew you into that space? Saying, hey, that's the answer.
I appreciate your introduction, and it really was an act of generosity that effectively saved my life when I was a young person. Now it's taken me decades to work through all that, and everything's happened. It's not like immediately my life changed overnight. But as you alluded to in the introduction, I did have an experience where I thought I was on top of the world. I was an 18-year-old college kid, was going, or 18-year-old high schooler going off to college, and thought I had everything going for me in my life. I was going to have a chance to play football. I was going to have a chance to get my education. I was going to have a chance to spend some time near New York City, in New York City, and all throughout Long Island, which is where much of my family is from. I actually live in South Florida now. I've lived here since I was 3, but I had all these things going for me in a very short period of time. I went from feeling almost invincible. I don't know about you gentlemen, but when I was 18, I thought I was the invincible force in the world, like nothing could take me down. But in very short order, I went from thinking that my mortality is closer than I think. And then, as I mentioned, generosity ultimately saved my life. It's a detailed story. I'd be more than happy to share more details on it. But ultimately, that experience allowed me to think a little bit more deeply about what we all have in this world and how we can use our gifts and skills to help other people thrive.
Bob, I'm guessing that fundamentally you would agree that everyone starts with either a surplus mentality or a lack mentality. If you could tell me if I'm right, can you tell me how a small business can use this success mentality to win instead of do without?
Absolutely. I would love to talk about this. And I often talk about how generosity is good business, but the foundation of being a generous person is not necessarily having a lot of things or having material possessions or a lot of money or any specific items, but it's about feeling capable or having the confidence in oneself to support and do good in the world and do other things. And if you believe that you're capable of assisting other people, I think you'll find that you believe strongly in other people's ability to do that as well. Because I believe we are born naturally with the desire to be of assistance. The problem is a lot of the forces in the world, whether that's in your personal life or in your business life, tell us that we're just not good enough, that we need another tip, another trick, another hack, something else that we need more of to be able to contribute to the greater good in the world. And I just don't believe that. I believe that we should always be trying to improve and self-improvement and business growth and scaling are important. But right now, if you're listening to this or watching this show right now, the moment you experience this conversation between the three of us, you're capable of doing something great. And so when you believe that, it is an abundance mentality because everyone has that ability to contribute. So why not work with, alongside, and collaborate with other people to find success?
Usually in business, the primary focus is on profitability, the net revenue, and to fuel everything else. How do you balance that out with this financial success? And is it like a really short term look at things versus a long term goal? You're going to increase what? If you do a hard increase, then you're burning bridges in the process, or
One of my favorite things to talk about is delaying gratification. And we talk a lot about that when referring to people's individual experience in life. But I think it also applies in business as well. One of my favorite things to talk about or think about is the ability to make small steps and how powerful they can be when building something. We all want overnight success and the most exciting, the mountaintop experiences. You want the massive sales contract. Now, if you're in business, you want to bring in the biggest customer you can. Those things are all good. But what I found is that you don't actually learn as much from those opportunities. So they're good. And your, as I've heard it called before, your luck surface area might be increased as you get better in your business. So there's a better chance of those happening, but you cannot count on those to be your foundation. And when you talk about profits, we can go into all sort of technical details about how consistent income and having more consistent customers is better than a smaller amount of large ones. But in the instance of generosity, or the instance of what I like to talk about, I think it's very important to think about what are the things that are going to sustain the revenue in your business, and it can sustain the profitability of your business and the comfortability, the fulfillment of your employees, and ultimately the loyalty of your customers. And I believe that most business owners would agree with me that those things are vitally important to your business. If you have a business, it's all about the people. You can't run it if good people aren't supporting you. And if you don't have good people as customers or clients, depending on whether it's a product or service you're offering, then ultimately you're not going to have a business. So by treating people well, you're feeding the sources of income and the tools and the great opportunities you have to bring in revenue in the future. So you might get, it might be, I'll never forget this. In my first, I come from the financial industry. And when you talk about money, we can talk about money. We can go in grave detail on money if you want to. But ultimately, when I first started the industry, I remember having a big, like a huge win, like a massive contract that I was able to sign up, and my team and I made quite a bit of money. And I was like, wow, that was hard. So I thought that I thought it was easy, but I thought I learned all the lessons in that transaction because we had to go through all the compliance checks. We had to get things approved by multiple parties. I had to do all this different training to learn how to sell and offer these different products and services. I did a lot of work to do that. And I thought I learned a lot, but ultimately when that transaction was complete, it was like barren. There was nothing there, and I didn't have any lessons to learn. And the amount of money that we made off of that contract only lasted us about 3 months, and nothing else happened in that 3-month period. And we were back at zero. I would have preferred to have a bunch of smaller contracts that lasted longer. And so when you talk about building businesses, consistency and balance, which by the way, I have some thoughts on the word balance. It's a popular term out there, work-life balance, balancing different things in your business. I prefer to use the word harmony. I think if we can harmonize things, then we can find beauty in what it is that we're doing. So that was the really long answer to your question. The short answer is it's critical to focus on the things that support revenue, not just revenue.
Bob, I'm interested just from what in the 2 minutes we've been talking, I sense there's a spiritual component to this.
I'd say you have a pretty good sense.
Can you unpack that?
Absolutely. When you talk about business in a numbers, metric, measurement focus, I think we have a tendency to think that it's robotic. And they say what gets measured gets improved. So if I follow this really hard, I check the numbers, I'm likely to recognize what's going wrong or what's going well, and we'll continue to improve. I do believe that. But I also believe that your purpose behind what you do is vastly more important than just winning the game, whatever that game is. In fact, I think those of us who do not do a good job of defining our why and our purpose behind what we do are those that will eventually get burnt out. And we've all heard burnout, working 80 hours a week and hustle culture. And there's a lot of bashing going on in that space right now. And while I don't necessarily agree with all of it, I do get it because that's not a long-term sustainable, productive way to do business. Uh, for myself, as a person who believes in divine power, who believes in God and believes that I have been given specific gifts and skills and opportunities to improve myself for a reason, I think it's critical that you understand that. And I, having worked with thousands of families over the years in the financial industry, counseling them on their personal and business finances, I could count on one hand, literally on one hand, the amount of people whose true goal, their actual purpose for being in business was money. 99.9% of them had some outside purpose, whether they had gone through the work to think about it or not, whether they believed there was a spiritual component to their actions in life or not, they did have some kind of other purpose. And so I think it is absolutely critical before you start taking on new responsibilities or before you start a new business, especially, that you consider, what are you being called to do? What is the spirit, if you will, telling you or calling you to use your gifts and skills for? And I think the greatest business people have identified those two things. What are their gifts and skills that are unique, that they can put together in their own cocktail, if you will, to help the world? And then how are they going to use them? How are they being led spiritually to use them for good in the world? I really do appreciate your question or requests to unpack that.
You mentioned harmony and to harmonize. What are you harmonizing? So it's self, certain context.
Yes, it really, whatever the context you've determined is important. So going back to Wayne's question just a moment ago, when you do identify the things that are meaningful to you and your purpose for taking on this task or starting this new business, then you now, I find now, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a business coach, and I'm not a anyone in the psychological professions in any capacity. However, I've studied a lot on these things. And what I find is that once you reach that point or you've determined those things that we just mentioned, you tend to get a lot of ideas. You tend to get a million different things running through your mind. You can't sleep. You're excited. It's a good feeling. You feel like you've got all these opportunities in front of you and you're really going to make a difference. Now, those are good, but you got to be careful because if you have 15 different ideas, you can't implement them all. You might have 50 different values or pieces of your mission that you want to start with. And I learned this lesson the hard way as well, too, that it's like being a jack of all trades and a master of nothing. You have to identify the ones that are most important. So when you talk about what are you going to be balancing, I think it's critical as a business owner and a leader in your community to consider, what are you balancing or what are you harmonizing? And I can guarantee you this. I can guarantee you two things. I don't know the answer to that for you without speaking to you, but I also know that the answer is not everything that ran through your mind or everything that you jotted down on your notepad or every last piece of your business plan. I find that harmonizing is generally usually about three things. Once again, no psychological training here, but I feel like the human mind really in one given time on a primary focus in your lives. I'm not talking about other things that you do for leisure or things that you like, but maybe aren't prioritized. I'm talking about things that you're really concentrating on. You can usually handle about three of them. And so it's really important to be able to harmonize those. And the reason why I use the word harmony is because I think, going back to the spiritual aspect of it, there are things and situations and gifts and blessings that you've been given that only you have. You're the only one that can bring those different things together at the same time to harmonize them. But balancing things consistently is just wholly impossible, in my opinion. You'll never be able to, for an extended period of time, give the same amount of time, effort, thought, energy, money, the exact amount to everything to where everything's just all balanced. Like I have my three most important things and I spend 8 hours a day on each of them. And I spend $1,000 a month on each of them and they each make me the same amount of money. And I have the same, it doesn't work like that. You have to go through the mental machinations to figure out how to harmonize. And there could be certain situations where one of them you're spending a lot more time on, but the other one you're spending a lot more money on, or the other one you're spending more, you're more patient. You're not working. It's on the back burner. You don't know, but whatever those three things are, maybe it's two, maybe it's five, depending on the person. But the idea, you have to figure out how to harmonize all of those things together. Because I have found, and the best example I can give of this is I know a lot of people working through, I don't want to say health issues, because that makes it like illness, but they have wellness. They're trying to be well. And when you talk about work-life balance, like how hard should I be working? How much time should I spend at the office? How much time should I spend resting? I will tell you, it's never exactly the same amount of hours, but when you work really hard during the right period of time, your rest and leisure time is so much better. And when you actually take the time to rest and be leisurely, though the period of time that you are working hard is also more productive. And that's what I mean by harmony, not complete balance, but they should all be supporting each other. I know that when it's time to rest and not work, I'm off. I am not working. I might be tempted to because I'm, an achiever, but I know that if I don't take this rest time, when I go back to work during my actual work period, I'm just not going to be as good.
The difference between what's taught and what's actually reality. We all hear about employee engagement and we hear cultural things that this generation doesn't engage and blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing to me is there's an easy topical answer about having a generous spirit and how that engages. And that is true. But one thing that I'd like to take on is my fear is that sometimes that generosity can seem transactional. I bought my employee a milkshake, therefore he should engage, rather than my spirit was one of giving. And so that it flowed naturally.
You have a very valid question. And so a lot of the work that I do and things that I've researched about the importance of giving experiences, giving knowledge, giving empowerment and opportunity more than giving a milkshake per se. Now, this doesn't mean that a great menu in the cafeteria at your office, if you have that sort of business, or bringing your receptionist to Starbucks one morning on occasion, or a milkshake or whatever it might be, does not mean that those things are bad, but those should not be considered incentives. If your generosity is with an expectation, my question to you, is it truly generosity? If I feel like I have to bring a fancy drink to my employee to get them to pay attention in the meeting, then there's something else missing. And so your question is valid because I do find many people and many leaders whose default to motivation is giving some kind of tangible or monetary gift. And I've worked in the sales space before, and I know it's like to be number one in a sales contest, to be paraded in front of your colleagues. I also know what it's like to be at the bottom of that list too, and feel like, man, I'm not capable. So there are all kinds of things, Wayne, and all kinds of reasons why I'm not a big fan of using tangible items or monetary value as an incentive. What I do believe is important, though, is giving people the opportunity to express themselves and do as best as they can, and helping them feel supported, but not micromanaged, helping them feel empowered, but not in charge of everything, but not responsible for their entire department. And there's a fine line between that. And so the tangible type of things that you reference, I think those are table stakes for certain scenarios. Not table stakes for every morning you have to bring someone something, but if there's an office party or get together, or you're having people take a working lunch, you should probably be offering lunch. So I don't want to make it seem like those things are not important, but those are not the things that should get them to engage. The things that should get them to engage are the things that make them feel capable of engaging.
It sounds like if you want to drive a car, you just don't buy the wheels. The wheels don't make the car, and the motor doesn't. Yeah, so that makes really good sense.
Yep.
Part of what you're doing for generosity, and I get the piece. It's not necessarily here's your bonus.
Mhm.
It's more like I need time off, boss, and you grant that person. How do you, if your budget is tight or your resources are tight, what have you seen people do? I may not be able to give you a bonus right now because the cash flow isn't strong, but I can do other things. Is that another avenue?
Yes. And we all know there's lots of thoughts right now about the business world, inflation, and where is the economy at, depending on what industry you're in. You could be doing really right now, or you could be doing really poorly. And having been through a couple stock market issues, if you will, while in the financial space, I know what it's like to not be able to pay the bonus to the employees, not be able to support them as they would have liked. I also know what it's like to take people on a trip one year and say, hey, we did really well. Congratulations, everyone. We're going to go here. And then the next year being like, everyone be like, okay, where's the trip? And I was, unfortunately, me and my business partners had to be like, you know what? It's just not possible this year. So I know what that's like. And so the solution is not necessarily a replacement for those things. I think the solution comes prior to that point. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to eliminate those conversations completely. But the solution is prior, because if people know why and the purpose and what the significance of a specific event or trip or offer or bonus is, I think it's a little bit easier for them to prepare and understand that's not the version of appreciation that they might see at that point. But if you make people feel appreciated prior to that, regardless, if someone is just working solely for their bonus, then I would argue that there's a missing link between their why and their purpose. And make no mistake, a generous workplace culture, as I like to call it, is one that allows everyone there to have their own why and their own purpose. And I encourage leaders to give people that time. When they come on board, make sure they understand. Don't overwhelm them with training and tasks and items and shadowing other people and learning how to do their job as best as they can, or sitting in on meetings. Allow them to develop their own sense of purpose for the work that they're prepared to do. And so as they come to the office and as they grow in their career, they feel empowered. They feel highly capable of contributing to something good. And they don't feel as if there's a light at the end of the tunnel that they have to get to. They don't feel that they have to reach a certain level of production just to get this bonus so that their spouse doesn't get mad at them, or that they can buy their gifts for their kids at Christmas time. The idea is that they don't necessarily get excited every morning to run into the office and give everyone a high five before they get to start sifting through emails. But they feel that the effort and time that they're putting into their job is contributing to something more than just the bank account, that is contributing to their ability to do well. And it's contributing to someone else in the world. And so that may not be a replacement for the bonus one year. But if people can feel appreciated and you can show them in the office and at the office Christmas party and towards the end of the year or whenever it might be, when it's their time of celebration for them, maybe in their personal life, like a birthday or anniversary, you can show appreciation and understanding for them as people, then I think there's less of a chance for disappointment to set in when they don't get the bonus this year. In addition to what I said about them already knowing that it's not coming because they're intimately involved. They actually care about the business. I know a lot of employees, and I don't just mean entry-level employees, C-suite type of people or people that have been with an organization for a long period of time, that they believe that their work is simply to serve their company. And when you feel like that, the only thing they can think about is what type of bonus or time off or whatever they're going to get towards the end of the year. And they see accomplishment as relief. And the moment that you see accomplishment as relief, then there's no fulfillment. When I was working in my previous role, there were times where I would accomplish something great. I'd be celebrated for it. but it didn't make me feel fulfilled. It just made me feel relieved. Oh, thank God. I got the bonus that I needed, or I got the award. Now I won't lose my certification or something like that. I'll still get to go to the conference this year. What a relief, because I know my family wouldn't be very happy with me if I couldn't take them on the trip. As opposed to me feeling, wow, I feel really good about this accomplishment. And not to get on too much of a tangent, but this is critical for helping people find empowerment and giving them agency over the work and helping them define their own success. Because nothing is more fulfilling than accomplishing a challenge that you've determined to be important to yourself. And that's vastly different than accomplishing a feat or overcoming a challenge that someone else has given to you. And so it's critical to have that connection. And when people feel that way and they find fulfillment in the success in business, they don't need all the tangible stuff.
In corporate communications, we hear a lot about mission-driven and mission-driven companies. And tell me about your mission. How do you find that goes beyond a 20 by 24 poster in the break room?
That's a great point. And I have some strong thoughts about that 20 by 20 poster, because what is critical to me is how people feel. And you've maybe heard the saying before, and that's not about what you say, it's about how you make people feel or what they remember, how they remember you made them feel. And as someone who's does plenty of speaking engagements, I try to consider this when I'm on the stage a lot. And it also applies in this scenario. The people that you're leading, you may have heard Simon Sinek say before, something to the effect of, it's not about being in charge. It's about taking care of those in your charge. And so when you're taking care of people and you're helping them feel a specific way, it's a lot different than just them reading something over and over again. Now, if you're doing a good job of making them feel something, a poster can be a good reminder. But if it's never addressed, it's never talked about, they don't have any ownership or buy-in or contributory factors to that poster or what it means, then I don't think you'll find people truly feeling it. They're not going to have the experience of the mission. And so the greatest organizations have a couple things. They have the original vision and the mission development by either a single person, or they have a group of people that put something together originally. But they also have the systems in place to follow up on that and to make that consistent in what they do, to make the connection between the poster, if you will, and the actions that are going on inside and outside the office. In my opinion, it's about how you're making people feel about the mission and how important it is and why they're on the team, how they're capable of contributing to the team, why they're there, and what are the things that they can do to advance that mission. If the mission is just words, then it doesn't really do much. And the more and more I see this way, and I'm not sure if this was part of your question, but it just, popped into my head. The more and more I see mission statements written to perfection and AI and figuring out how to get the most clicks, if you will, on whatever statement it is that your company is making, I feel like companies were getting attention by what they claim to be their mission, but you don't really feel or understand what their mission is until you experience doing business with them. And so I always try to keep that in mind and encourage organizations to keep that in mind. What's more important than the words you say is how people feel either working for your organization or working with your organization.
Something you said that I think is powerful. You mentioned the word harmonize, and I really like that. I think, though, it needs to state that the opposite of harmony is chaos. And so there are some organizations that they want to actually staple harmony on, but they don't understand that there's actually a chaos in almost the building. It's almost in the very bricks and sticks. When you live in chaos or you work in chaos, how do you bring people to harmony?
The thing that comes to mind for me is resilience and adaptability. The answer to this, the solution, is not to micromanage, control everything, overplan, because I've been there as well too, thinking that I need to have the most detailed plan in the world and try to consider every scenario that could possibly happen. And I'm sure you all can both echo this one, and I've seen it. There's just no way to prepare for everything that could possibly happen in business. What's more important is knowing the greater mission, feeling the mission, if you will, to take a note from our previous question, but the ability to understand a given situation and adapt as needed is more valuable, or the most valuable, in handling chaos. And I do understand with what you're saying, that the opposite of harmony is chaos. And so it's not for each department and each person to know exactly what every person is doing and it to be robotic, because then why do we need to hire people? Then we probably could just have AI do everything. But the idea is that giving people the opportunity to make decisions, empowering them to use their intuition. If you bring on someone to the team and you don't trust in a likely scenario or a possible scenario, then you probably shouldn't have brought them on, or they should be in a different role. And I think great leaders, great interviewers, great relationship driven people are able to figure this out, able to feel and understand how people will react to certain situations. And chaos is going to happen. There are going to be chaotic times. Now, your main premise of your business or your main foundation or what you're known for should probably not be chaos, unless it's some kind of unique business venture. But the idea is that not, I'm going to avoid chaos at all costs, as opposed to I'm going to be well prepared when chaotic things happen.
You talk about having the harmony in the business space. Where does the harmony come from? Like, where does it spring forth? Is it from you and then kind of leaks into other people, or you're like birds of a feather come together? And didn't mean to rhyme that, but are you looking for that? And does size matter? Because if you're a team of 5 people, 10 people, yeah. If you're a team of 2,000 people, how do you spread that construct throughout the space?
I think a great leader is clear about what's important to them. And as I mentioned about the 3 things earlier, my non-scientific number and definition of what the human mind can handle, but they are very clear from the outset on what needs to be harmonized primarily. And when a team member joins, when a new employee or new hire comes into the office, they should go into that role with the expectation of what the priorities are, with the expectation of what needs to be harmonized. And in addition to that, a good leader, a good department head, a good manager will provide that person with suggestions, tasks, ideas, resources, so that they can help be part of the harmony. And mistakes will happen, especially early on. And that's where sometimes the chaos comes from. But in business, harmony is truly about clarity. It's about understanding what the most important things are, so that when you're an employee, you come into the office in the morning and your role doesn't define an exact task that you have to do in that moment, that you can think about, okay, what are the priorities here? What are the most important things to be done? I can give you numerous examples of this not going well, because someone will come into the office and they have a different understanding of what's prioritized and what's important. How many times have you seen this? Happens in other relationships too, in family. It probably happens with my marriage all the time. Mrs. DePasquale, God bless her, that she's one of the most patient people in the world. But how many times have we had a disagreement or a misunderstanding because I thought the priority was this and she thought the priority was this? It's the same thing in the business setting. A leader who provides clarity for his or her people allows them to share in those priorities and the harmonizing of those priorities. If they come into the office and and it's usually not malintent. It's not the person came in, they were trying to sabotage the business. The person came in, to them, this one item was so important. And because the leader gave them the agency over their time and their work, they said, all right, I'm empowered to make this decision myself. I need to go chase after this thing because I've identified this as really important. And those are the scenarios where these things can happen. Instead, the leader should be very clear, and over time, it should settle in with people. And the culture and the environment suggests that these things are important. so that when that person comes into the office, there's a much more highly likely chance that they'll try to harmonize something that they should be trying to harmonize based on the mission and the rules and ideas set forth by the leader. So in the end, there's never going to be a foolproof plan here. But harmonizing in business, as I said, is about clarity. It's so that those self-empowered employees of yours can make decisions that align well with the mission of the organization. And this is all really connected because you asked about the mission, and it's the same idea. If the mission is not felt, then there's probably not a very good chance that the decision that they're going to make is going to be related to one of the priorities. But if they feel the mission and it's meaningful to them, there's a pretty good chance that when they start harmonizing, if you will, to stick with the metaphor, they're going to start playing the right instrument, if you know what I mean.
Does age play a role in that? If you're 16 versus 26 versus 36 versus 46, each era has a different emphasis. And you could be a 16-year-old and an extremely wise soul, or you can be a 16-year-old and you're just trying to figure out what a wise soul is, let alone become one, right? And conversely, you could be 46 and you still at your age 16 level. Does age and experience play a role in that?
Experience definitely does, because your experience in a specific industry, for example, might allow you different paths of thought. Age, to me, a lot of times has to do with confidence. Now, there's outliers. You have your overly confident 16-year-old and your overly humble 76-year-old. But age really has to do with the pace, what I found. But what that doesn't mean is that any age or experience level is good or bad. In fact, I think having a variety of ages and experience levels is good because it provides different perspective. But it still all goes back to what are the priorities? Because if the 76-year-old and the 16-year-old believe and feel the same thing about the mission and priorities of the organization, they're likely to address the same things. Now, their generation might lead them to address it in a different way. The 76-year-old might go door knocking, and the 16-year-old might send an Instagram DM. But the idea is that they're going to be addressing the same things. The methods and the way people do it, I often suggest having a variety, which is different. You should have a variety of missions in your organization, a variety of priorities.
I got a question for you right out of the chute, Bob. You, if I was going to guess, I would say that your reputation is a generosity guy. If you are trying to look at the bigger picture and you're looking at your business plans and you're looking at prudence and you're looking at responsibility and all the good words, does generosity, in your opinion, create such a factor, an abundance that it really doesn't even need to deal with prudence? Or does wisdom kick in to making sure you're getting, I won't say bang for the buck. I guess I just did say bang for the buck. How do you deal with understanding how generosity fits in a bean county organization?
There's two ways to look at it. The one way would suggest that you have to find a way to measure the amount or effectiveness of your generosity on the people that you're providing for. And the other one would, and then you would also have to measure what you're receiving back for it. And I suppose that makes sense. And I have some ways, I've done some research on this and trying to figure out what the best way to measure generosity is. Is it the amount of time we spent? Is it the amount of money we spent? Is it the amount of people that have contributed to specific causes? And I found it very hard to come up with a general rule of thumb there. My encouragement for organizations in that realm is to identify what makes the most sense for what you're trying to do. And then what you can do is you can backtrack into the results. So you can say, all right, we sent out 50 people this year and they spent this amount of man hours on doing what they did. And this is the recognition we got for it. Or if you're a small business or you're a solopreneur type, you might say, I volunteered at 10 events and I got 3 clients because people called me as a result of meeting them at that event. That's certainly possible. And you probably want to do that as a prudent business person. However, the other approach that I think is more important specifically to figuring out the value of generosity in your business and ultimately in your life too, is to look at the experience of the people that you work with and the people that you employ. And I firmly believe that when you find joy in the journey, you'll find fulfillment in the finish. And that goes for you, and that goes for your customers, and that goes for your employees in business, and then ultimately in most of the things that you take on in life. But strictly in a business sense, measuring your generosity or your return on investment is about understanding the experience that the people you work with, work for, and work for you have. And the only way to get information regarding that is to have a relationship with them and solicit feedback. So that doesn't mean you send out your annual survey. You have a large corporation and you just send out your employee survey and they fill out a few things on a scale of 1 to 10 and they send it back to you and you analyze the data. That's not what I mean. What I mean is you have to have a relationship with someone to truly know if their work is enjoyable and they're doing well. And if you can do that, if you can figure out a way for the people in your departments, if you have a large organization, or if you employ just a handful of people, then you can do it personally yourself. You have to figure out a way to get the true understanding of how someone is experiencing their work. And it doesn't mean that polls and those type of things are bad. If you have a good relationship with people, you can say to them specifically, hey, I'd love for you to fill out this survey for me. It shouldn't take you more than 5 minutes, but I genuinely care about your workplace experience. And I can guarantee you, the more people that generate a positive response to those questions, to those surveys, or just to a conversation, maybe you just take them out to eat. One of the best things that one of my sales leaders and managers did back in the day was we would have our group meeting where we would go over all the metrics and the numbers and the leaderboard and who made the most money for the company and who didn't. And we all understood how we were doing from a revenue perspective. But the best thing that he did was go out to lunch or dinner or whatever it was individually with each person that was in his charge, to take the line from Simon Sinek. And personally, his survey was a personal conversation. And it wasn't about the numbers and it wasn't about the specific things that we already talked about in the group meeting. And it also wasn't about just what was I doing this weekend. It was specifically about what did I feel about what I did in the workplace. So answering your question, you have to understand how people experience the work that they do. And a lot of the work I talk about, a lot of the generosity I talk about is not how much money did I give to the local food bank. We should be doing that. That's an important piece of generosity. But I'm talking about a workplace environment where people feel supported and you're giving to them. And so if they feel good about that, if they feel good about their workplace experience, then I can guarantee you that their performance will be maximized and that the revenues and the success of your organization will show it. And you can feel a shift. Now, it'll never happen overnight because you can't fire 8 people that are having a bad time, or 8 people are going to quit and then immediately bring in 8 people that really resonate with the mission of the organization. But you can feel the difference when people who enjoy their work do, because then they're more likely to make the right decisions. They're more likely to support other people around them. And the only way you can measure those things is by understanding how they feel. And then if you compare that to your year-over-year revenue numbers, I'm confident that they're correlated. They're highly correlated. The way people feel and the performance of their work to the performance from a financial perspective of your business and your other goals too. Let's be honest. Some goals, or a lot of goals, or lagging indicators for a lot of organizations are not just the money. It's the number of customers, the impact we make, market share, innovation. They measure these different things. And I guarantee you all of those achievement-based lagging indicators are highly correlated with the enjoyment of the workplace experience that people have.
Is there a region or an industry that really exemplifies this? Is something just areas in North America, Europe, Asia, where you see that generosity piece? It's a good classic example to go, there it is.
Two things. One is many might jump right to the nonprofit sector in really any area of the world. However, what I find is that the mindset in many organizations is there to be generous about a specific cause for a specific group of people, but they struggle to provide the generous environment for the people, the internal people to the organization. And so I want to bring that up because I know people might jump to that. I've done quite a bit of work with 501(c)(3)s in the nonprofit space as well. So that's important to note. But to answer your question, I think service-based businesses, specifically in the hospitality industry, I find it to be there to be some organizations who are exemplary at making people feel like they're contributing and make people feel good. Their environments are generous. And then on the flip side, there's also quite a few that maybe aren't so good. The food service industry comes to mind. The construction industry comes to mind, where I don't feel like people feel like they're in a generous workplace culture. But I would say hospitality. And then another one that I find, I used to do quite a bit of work with dentists actually. And I feel like many of the dentists and the mouth professionals, if you will, that I know in organizations, they seem to do a good job of helping their employees feel empowered about the work that they do. And I think it has something to do with the preventative nature of that industry. How many of us have a good relationship with our dentist because we go in to get our teeth cleaned beforehand? And so the dental hygienists and the people who work in those offices, I think they generally feel like they're doing a really good thing for people and they come in happy and they feel good about what they do. So that's a great question. I've never been asked that one before, but yeah, hospitality and the dental industry for sure.
I remember my dentist when I look at him going, thank you. Thank you for taking care of my grin.
Yeah. Now, some people don't like the feeling
No,
of the slide, but
no. It's more the drilling sound and the sudden jab of a needle.
yeah,
Sorry.
bleeding.
Go.
One thing that I sense that you're pretty passionate and could actually unpack or expound this for a very long time. But if people have short attention spans, what are 2 or 3 takeaways that business owners should know?
Yeah, I'll give you two. And I have plenty, but short attention span, the TLDR pretty much for generosity in the workplace, is number one, active listening and questioning. The best leaders understand their people more than anything. And I firmly believe that generosity is not something that happens by accident. It's an active process. You must understand what is needed. You can't give someone what they need without knowing them and knowing what they need. So generosity is not about random, believe it, love random acts of kindness and randomly supporting someone when you realize it in the moment. Don't stop that. But as far as building culture, you can't just throw stuff at the wall and just hope people need it. You got to know the people. So the best thing you can do is make it a habit of asking people intentional questions around the office, whether that's a virtual office or it's a Zoom call like we're on now, whatever it is, make sure you're intentional at asking people questions about their work and their life. Understand them as people. That's the number one thing. And then the other tip is there's nothing better than having fun. And I don't mean the team building exercise at the go-kart track on Saturday afternoon. Having fun with what you're doing, like actually in the moment. And I did a LinkedIn learning course not too long ago about workplace fun. And I think you'd be surprised about how simple it is to support people in that aspect of life. Most people go home not to have fun. They go home because they're tired after work and then they have a whole bunch of other things to do before they go to bed and do it again. If you can provide them just a little bit of enjoyment, gamifying a task at work or making something fun around the office, just provide, maybe even it's a little bit of humor, you'd be surprised of how that picks up the morale around the office. Quick recap, ask great questions and listen to the answers. And number two, make it fun.
Bob, if someone wants to get a hold of you and say, hey, I want to be generous, I want to be that generous guy or gal, how do they get a hold of you? How do they do that connection?
I'll tell you two things. One, you can go to my website, bobdepasquale.com. The social links are there, but hit me up on any of the socials. And if you want this type of insight every week, you can go to g2.bobdepasquale.com, and I send out a newsletter every Friday. You can respond directly to that too and get in touch with me anyway.
I want to say thank you to Bob Pasquale, my co-host Wayne Pratt, and you, the Knack for Business listeners. If you want to know more about generosity, or hey, you want just to understand it better, reach out to Bob. To reach us, it's info@creativeinsight.com. That's info at KREATIVINSIGHT.com, or the website's at creativeinsight.com. Wayne, how can folks reach you, sir?
Best way is my website, motivateyou.ca, MOTIVE, the numeral 8, the letter U.ca, and my email is wayne@motivateyou.ca.
If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people: Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert; Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host; Javan Strika from Hiva, co-working space that is more than just a space; then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner; and Wayne Pratt from Motivate You Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer: please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.